Welcome to the On-Premise IT Podcast, the only podcast that dares to be both on topic and on location. My name is Tom Hollingsworth, and as a part of Gestalt IT, I work with the group to bring you the perspectives and opinions of a group of IT luminaries, experts in their field in just about everything there is to do with enterprise IT. I'd like to take a moment for everybody to introduce themselves before we jump into the premise or the topic of today's episode, starting with Pat.
Hello, Pat Allen. I'm a network architect for Customers Bank here on the East Coast, a small regional bank, and one third of the co-host of the podcast Breaking Down the Bytes. So happy to be here. Thanks, Tom.
I'm Drew Conry-Murray. I am a writer and podcaster over at packetpushers.net.
Hi, I'm Ali. I work as a solutions architect for VAR. Happy to be here, my first NFD, so excited about it.
All right, well, thank you all very much for joining us. Let's jump into the topic, the premise for today's episode. We've heard a lot about new exciting advances in technology all the time. There's some new bit of hardware or software coming out that will solve all of our problems. But are we really rethinking the way that we do networking? I heard that term a lot when we were talking about software-defined networking, and I'll give you a little spoiler. We really weren't. But there is a new idea on the horizon that is promising that we're going to completely revolutionize the way that infrastructure networking is done. That's network as a service. You may have heard it referred to as NaaS. And it has a lot of people curious about what's going to happen. It has a lot of people worried for their jobs. So the premise for today's episode is network as a service going to be the end of engineering roles? I'm going to open it up to the panel here because I maybe I'm a little bit confused, but I hear network as a service from people. And I think I know what it is, but then I hear somebody else define it completely differently. So I want to get your perspective on this. What do you feel like network as a service is?
Well, based on what I'm hearing from different vendors, it depends on who's selling you what. There are some vendors who position network as a service as we'll come in and essentially manage your network for you, sort of like a managed service offering. And then the other flavor is, we'll get you a virtual switch, a virtual router, spin that up, and also provide you the connectivity. And there's usually some kind of public cloud element to that. So I guess my first question is, which NaaS are we talking about?
No, I've always thought of network as a service as more of the managed service side of that, coming from an MSP perspective, or, hey, you don't have the people or the expertise in a small shop, so farm that out to, an MSP and let them kind of take it over. So network as a service is always kind of, hey, coming from that managed, an arm of the managed service machine, if you will.
With a lot of things, I think it one of the word we kind of say it a lot, like it depends, because just depending on what kind of service it is, kind of like back to what Drew mentioned, it can not necessarily. It can help the organization and also the IT teams and even network engineers, because I remember working in enterprise as a network engineer, getting pulled in 20 different directions, right? Do this, that done. I mean, just different projects getting thrown at you and all that kind of stuff. So resources is always we're limited in resources, bodies that can actually do some technical tasks, and companies where if a network as a service comes in and takes over maybe, layer 2 portion of that network and kind of handle that, and I can then focus on some bigger projects and handle layer 3 and security and some other critical aspects of the network, and not having to deal with layer 2 and access layer, that frees up a lot of my time, and then I can focus on crucial pieces of the network.
So in a way, what you're saying is that if you can have somebody to offload parts of your network, it would help you out, as opposed to, something more akin to what Pat was saying, where I just outsource all of the operations of my IT infrastructure from a network perspective to somebody else who just comes in and configures stuff. And I essentially treat it like a cloud, where it's like somebody else deals with the hard part. I just, tell them what I need and it's taken care of.
I think that depends on the organization, right? What their requirements are. So, I mean, I see that I see it a fit for certain organization, not in every single enterprise. I mean, think about a large enterprise. They're not going to want to kind of have that much control, for example, just hand it out to someone outside. They're going to want to have their network engineers and architects that are internal and kind of taking care of their network, right? I mean, I don't think any big enterprise is going to want to give away that full control. Hey, Mr. Vendor, you just take over my network and that's it, right? It will only go. I believe there will be limits to that.
I think my feeling about network as a service, if we're talking about it as a managed service, is that it always kind of sounds better than it's going to be. And I'm thinking about sort of the IT world's experience with outsourcing 1.0, where everybody shipped a lot of software development and operational stuff to workers who tended to be overseas, and the quality just wasn't great. It tended to cause more headaches than it solved. Managed services for all kinds of things have been around forever, and they have not fully displaced internal IT teams, because as a managed service, they sort of have to have pretty vanilla offerings, and a lot of organizations have, they're snowflakey or special needs that an MSP can't necessarily fix. So is it going to take away jobs? I don't think so. Although the thing that could be different about this time around is that cloud managed networking is now a thing. So with multi-tenancy, it could conceivably be easier for a large networking vendor or an outsourcer to come in and manage your wireless network, your LAN, whatever, because it's all happening in the cloud anyway. And if they set it up as multi-tenancy, maybe that's a better experience than sort of a traditional, you need to have bodies in the office managing the routers and switches in a traditional MSP engagement.
You bring up a good point there, Drew, but I think we're kind of dancing around the problem of because those are all operations tasks, right? That's some of what we do with the cloud. We farm this out to people and we tell them, okay, well, we'll make sure that your software is updated and all that other stuff. But some of the companies who are talking about doing network as a service are not talking about farming out the operation of it. They're talking about farming out everything from soup to nuts: hardware acquisition, hardware installation, hardware management. And that kind of falls more on the engineering side of the house as opposed to operations staff, planning out what your IP address scheme is going to look like, or, which switches do we need in the data center versus the edge and things like that. And that's one of the things that keeps coming up for a lot of folks, because operations teams, we don't care. And especially if you're used to working like in a VAR environment, your job is to go out and build networks. You're not going to run them after you put them in. You're just going to install and walk away. But they're the companies, and one of the names that keeps popping up, one of the ones that will be presenting at Networking Field Day 32 is Nile. Nile is a company who walks in and says, we're going to just completely replace all of your hardware, and we'll take care of the whole thing. And that, I think that's where some people are starting to ask the question, well, if they're taking care of the engineering stuff, does that mean I don't need to be doing engineering anymore?
I have a twofold thought about that. Coming from kind of piggybacking what Ali said, in bigger environments, I think there's more to it than just, we're going to farm everybody out and everybody's going to be fat and happy. I think there's audit involved in that. There's risks. There's third party risks. Like all that has to be discussed depending on what industry you're in. Coming from the finance industry, that's a heavily regulated industry, so you have to really know who you're kind of handing the keys to, if you will. So I think that's a big part of it. The other part of that is I think it's sort of new to let up that sort of control from an engineering perspective, because at least for me, when it comes to IT things, and maybe if you ask my wife some personal things too, you have a bit of that control aspect, and you need to control various things around you. So if you're letting that go to a third party and just saying, here, do it, that oh my God, I'm not in control of every aspect, can really kind of, it's a new wave of thinking. There's a shift happening there, and I just but for me, I think the business requirements, or how your business is structured, like I said, audit, third party risk, all that has to be heavily vetted before you just go and be like, here you go, you start next week, have at it.
I see your point, Pat. Regulated industries are always going to be a group of people that kind of keep a very tight rein on things because they don't want other people touching what they're doing. But at the same time, we've seen regulated industries moving to the cloud. We've seen regulated industries adopting more in-depth network automation. Those are two boogeymen that I've been hearing about for a long time that are going to take my jobs, that are never going to be involved in this organization because I don't like the way that does it. And yet, here we are, it's as of the time of this recording, 2023, and those things are kind of basically like they're a settled problem. You're going to be in the cloud if you can be in the cloud. You're going to use automation if you can use automation. Like we don't use that as like, oh, you better watch out. So do you feel like that those regulated industries are just going to put the brakes on people trying to come in and take over the service wholesale? Or is it going to be kind of one of those things like boiling a frog where eventually we get to a point where people are going to adopt it because they figured out that the benefits outweigh the potential costs from a regulatory perspective?
Yeah, I think so. I think, if you look at traditional things of, the move to the cloud a couple of years ago, more than a couple now, but, governments and hospitals, things of that nature with very sensitive data, were sort of slow to move to the cloud because of, various regulated reasons and whatnot. But they're basically, they're basically here now. And I'm hearing the same thing you are, Tom, for the last, couple of years. Oh, automation is going to take the network shop. Like I've been hearing the network engineer is a legacy dinosaur for literally almost 20 years. So it's like, that doesn't make any sense to me. So I think the new boogeyman then as well, you could couple AI in with those couple of things too, of like, hey, it's going to take your job and blah, blah, blah. I don't really think it's going to do any of that. I think you're still going to need bodies, but you're going to have to work with these newer technologies, and the person that can wrap their head around these newer technologies and work with it or side by side and make their jobs easier, I think that's the best of the blend as far as from a network engineering perspective. You're going to have there's room for everybody. It just depends on how you harness it as a network person.
Yeah, handling that risk is going to be an important piece, right? Like, so regulated industries, or if we're talking industries like where, if you're down for like, I don't know, 30 minutes, you might lose like, I don't know, $10,000, right? Or, and you keep adding that, right? And it could get pretty crazy. So what happens in that case? I mean, if you give your keys to your kingdom to somebody else, who's managing it, I'm sure there will be SLAs and everything that are involved with it. But in an environment like that, I mean, can they afford to be down for 2 hours? Versus if they do have engineers on site and everything like that, think about it, they can immediately, and if it's an issue that is like at a layer 3 and higher, engineer can actually immediately fix that issue, let's say in 10 minutes or 20 minutes or 30 minutes, versus have to wait for a managed vendor to, find an engineer and resource and dispatch them, and whatever time it takes for them to get there and figure out what exactly happened. Plus, also, those engineers are not every day working on your network. I mean, they're working and touching multiple different networks, right? I mean, if you're managing a network, you're in that network all day, every day. You know it in and out. So you can probably hit that problem and fix it most likely much faster than somebody else to kind of come in and catch up first and figure out. And then, so some of these things kind of have to kind of worry about it too. Like it fits the industry definitely in certain case scenarios, but again, it will just depend on the organization and the risk and need. If somebody just absolutely does not have the resources, budget, I can definitely see them kind of moving towards this. Education, for example, I can see this a big deal in education.
I think there are certain markets that are probably amenable to network as a service because they've always been wanting to get rid of the operational costs of having IT. And those organizations that don't necessarily regard, their technology stack as giving them a competitive differentiator. And so that makes sense. If they're strictly looking at IT as a cost, then removing headcount and bringing somebody else in to solve that problem for them makes sense. I think that's a pretty small portion of the market. So, the other question is, can you name me an industry that's not regulated in some way where those kind of concerns aren't going to come up with an outsourcer?
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. There's always going to be a challenge to how that's going to work. But one thing that I heard in this conversation that kind of made me curious was this idea that AI is going to be a huge component of this. I believe Pat brought it up that, people were saying, oh, AI is going to be a challenge for network engineers and the way that we configure and automate systems. I've heard talk from some companies that perhaps there won't even be a need for AI with network as a service, because AI is designed to solve problems that are created by poor implementations. And with their implementation, it won't be done poorly. There won't be any misconfiguration of firmwares or settings or things like that. So I don't need to turn an AI agent loose on the network to fix my problems. They just won't exist. Do you think that argument holds water?
Nope.
No,
Spoken
I
like
don't.
somebody who's worked on a network before.
I always think there's going to be some sort of human element to the network game that we've been, playing in the last however many years. But and AI, is a I don't know, safety valve for human error, or tries to be, depending on what stage it's at. But like I said before, I think people that learn to use AI as a tool in the networking space, or really any space, from a career perspective, I think those are going to be the ones that are, the more well off and sort of ahead of the curve, if you will, in the next couple of years, to see where this AI driven world takes us. But there's always going to be a human element to it. And kind of going back to Drew's point, I think Drew made the point of, or maybe it was Ali, about outsourcing that, the network as a service, and not having that dedicated service engineer that knows your network in and out. I think that's a big one too, trying to find the right fit and trying to see, okay, yeah, I have a problem, but who do I get on the phone, and do they really know our network to really fix it in a bind, and things of that nature. So I think that's a big one too, is find the right fit. And then again, with the AI, if they use those tools correctly, kind of get it all together in the same soup, if you will, I think that really helps the industry going forward.
I think anybody who comes up to you and says, we're going to set up the perfect network that's never going to need any fixes or anything because we're going to do it right the first time, you should run the other way, because networks aren't static. IT systems aren't static. There's always going to be changes. I need a different access control. I need a new authorization. I need to connect something that hasn't been connected before. I'm adding new users. I'm adding new services. I'm adding new applications. You can't expect to build something from the ground up that's perfect and never needs to be touched. And if someone's telling you they can't do that, they're lying. Or they're building you a network you can never touch and change or do anything. It just got to run in a box. So take your pick.
And how many networks are always built like greenfield, right? I mean, a lot of them you're always migrating, right? It's always a migration. And then migration is not like, I mean, we're talking, there might be 3 vendors in there. And then you got this automation happening. Then, I mean, I had this one network that I worked on, I remember. I called it an every vendor network. I mean, we had anything from Linksys all the way to Cisco and Arista, for example, right? So doing some kind of migration in that and adding the automation piece to it, you're going to need like boots on the ground. You're going to need hands, being able to console into devices at times here and there. They're all. I look at it more of it will complement the network engineers and their jobs, and get to the root cause possibly, like in certain scenarios, faster, and free up my time as an enterprise engineer, like to do other things and learn more skills. That's kind of like I think I look at it.
I'd say you're right. It's at least in my experience as a former engineer, no network survives having users on it. But yet we see this all the time in cloud companies. We don't touch that hardware. We don't interact with the layer 1 and even a lot of the layer 2 devices. Everything is a layer 3 hop away, and yet somehow we're able to work that. So what is the magic that they're using that we're not seeing here? And I'm asking the question because I assume that the value that the network as a service providers are trying to offer is that cloud-like experience in on-prem equipment.
So the thing about the cloud model is that I think what it showed is that the hardware itself doesn't really matter. What matters is what you do on top of it, the configurations, all the permissions you set up, the way you connect it with other systems. That's what matters, and that all happens at the software layer. So it's not about just coming in and racking and stacking. Yes, you have to get that right, but that's just the beginning. And where all the tricky bits are in the software layers, in the permissions, in the configurations, in the connectivity. So just saying it's a hardware-based solution, that only gets you like the foot in the door in terms of the problems you need to solve. I mean, in fact, the thing you're building is going to create the problems. It's not about hardware. It's not a hardware issue.
Yeah. So the cloud, one quick point I wanted to kind of make was, yes, it's in the cloud, but they have their own whole team of engineers that are handling that hardware, right? So it's not like they're taking, I mean, those keys are given to some other vendor, right? I mean, yes, it's we migrated everything to cloud. To us, it's transparent, but they have a whole team of engineers that are handling all that hardware, making changes, whatever we want done, and maintaining it, backing it up, and all that kind of stuff, right? Versus in this case, network as a service is a little bit different because it's not technically in the cloud. We have actually network gear on-prem. I mean, it's, and they don't have their engineers sitting like at every single one of my sites.
Yeah, I would just say it does feel like there's always, like I said, there's always going to be a human element to it. Somebody's managing it on the back end. It just depends on how abstracted from the actual front line do you really want to be. And MSPs are a little further back, and VARs are a little further back from there, and it just depends on how deep you want to go. But I think network as a service, I think it applies to more of the smaller folks that just either don't have time, don't have the expertise to do that, or to be that person, or run that department, whatever. And then you kind of farm it out, and as long as you're dictating your business needs to whoever your network as a service provider is, if they're agile enough to change with you, then it may be a good fit. But it just depends on how far back you want to be from the front line, sort of thing. But I still think it is physical. There's somebody that's going to have to manage it. It just depends on how many layers of covers do you put in front of your face, that kind of thing.
So I'm going to have you put your skeptic hat on for just a minute. And someone is coming to talk to you about network as a service, and that this isn't going to be good for you, but you want to ask the question to help them help you understand what the value is. What question would you ask of a network as a service provider, vendor, you name it, to help them allay your fears about whether or not network as a service has any value and whether or not it's going to cost people jobs?
Well, I think it goes back to my thing earlier as far as that control aspect, right? You're giving the keys up to a third party, a vendor, or whatever. Because at the end of the day, right, if you're still a network engineer, but you farmed out X, Y, or Z, whatever layer you want to talk about, and something goes wrong with that layer, like the business, you're the front line. If something is broke, I'm going to this person because it's a network problem. Even though you farmed it out, now you got to go chase your network as a service person, but you're on the front line. You're standing in front of the bus from a business perspective. So like you're ultimately you're responsible for the network. Now, however many pieces you farm out of that said network or what happens behind the covers is irrelevant to the person that's down or to the business unit that needs help. So to me, it's a control aspect of, okay, I'm going to give you these keys, but do I have access to do X, Y, and Z? And that's, like I said, a lot of people don't like giving up that sort of control, especially if you're, an old school network person who is literally used to managing everything from A to Z. Giving up some of that control can really be like a culture shock to some of these folks, and depending on how you're wired and whatnot. But ultimately, you are responsible for your business's network. Now you have to. There's more pieces to chase and more, ideologies to balance, or personalities to kind of sway, depending on what kind of fires are burning.
If I can do two questions, I would ask, and I think, Pat, this is kind of like what you were getting at. What is the boundary between what is your technical problem and my technical problem, or when does a technical problem become my problem? And the second question I would ask them is, you tell me about my business. What does my business do? What is the most valuable thing about my business? And if they can't answer that question, then maybe that's not the best solution for you.
In my case, I mean, Pat hit, pretty much all the points. Control is like one of the most important thing I would ask, like, because in the end, I mean, I made a decision to move. I'll be making a decision, like, should I decide to go, that route, whether it's whether you handle layer 2 and whether you're going all the way up to distribution or core or whatever. So how fast you can respond back to me in case of an issue, and what your SLA, obviously I need to know what your SLAs look like, right? And then if I'm not satisfied with them, well, how much of visibility that you're giving me so I can take care of that problem. So my job, because my job is on the line.
It's 5 nines. It's all 5 nines.
Somebody's nines, right? Well, I think that the topic of network as a service isn't quite as clean as we would like it to be. There's a lot of nuance to it, just like there is in everything. You know, as Ali said, as one of our favorite answers when it comes to enterprise IT is, it really depends. Are you a large organization that needs control over your things, or is someone telling you need control over them? Are you a small organization that doesn't have the expertise and just wants to have somebody else take care of it? Are you a hodgepodge of equipment that barely is fitting together now as it is? Do you just want to rip everything out and fix it, but you don't want to have the time invested in it to do things that you may not need again? There's a lot of reasons why someone would consider network as a service. I don't think it gets rid of the need to have engineering any more than modern construction materials don't get rid of the need to have someone who knows how to put them together, because it's not always putting them together like Lego bricks. Everything isn't going to fit nice and neatly because you're going to run into something that doesn't fit the pattern. And that's where the real value of having a human in the organization is. So don't think that networking as a service is going to get rid of your job. Think of it more as a way to get rid of the job things that you don't necessarily like so much, but make sure you're asking the right questions so you understand what's going to be involved in how this is going to augment your existing skill set. That'll just about do it for this episode of the On-Premise IT Podcast. Thank you very much for tuning in. We have a new episode every couple of weeks, so make sure that you tune in on our website at gestaltit.com/podcast. You can also check out more great conversations like this one during our next Networking Field Day event, which will be happening July 26th and 27th. You can go to techfieldday.com for more information about the lineup of presenters and delegates that will be taking part in it. We should be back with another great episode soon. Until then, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you then.